Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Human-Centered Design UAE Meetup. My name is Jonathan Steingisser. I'm currently head of product design at Property Finder here in Dubai, and really excited to kick off the year. We've got, as we've been chatting, quite a few exciting meetups and sessions planned out, and we're really happy and grateful to have Chris join us again. I think, Chris, you're the only one who has done now a second talk, which is great.
Really honored.
Is it 2 or 3? No, you didn't do one in the old days, right?
Colleagues of mine did one on basic
true.
wireframing and design systems as well.
That's true. So you're definitely winning the the kudos in terms of the support for the community. So well done.
Yeah.
The session is being recorded. And we do have, again, as we've been kind of chatting before, some really great sessions from the past. So if anyone's new to the meetup, I'd encourage you to, on YouTube, you can just search for Human-Centered Design, United Arab Emirates, and you can find us. I do want to acknowledge and thank, there's a lot of, we're obviously a community, nonprofit organization, and my fellow co-organizers, some of them have can join us, some of them can't, but they're always there behind the scenes. Katral, Nada, Greta, and Assad. So thank you to all of you. We are on too many social media channels. We should probably simplify, but predominantly it's LinkedIn and Instagram. So if you are on any of these channels and you do want to tag today or any of the quotes you hear or anything, or just joining the community and being a part of the conversation, please do so. Those are the handles, and I'm sure you can find us quite easily. As I've been saying, we even in the in-person meetups, which is pretty cool, something Greta introduced recently, we've been using slido.com for the questions. So if you could scan this QR code, I will share this in the chat as well for any late joiners. You can just look at the HCD UAE hashtag, or if you're using your phone, you don't have to obviously use QR code if you're all on your machine. You can just go to slido.com and quite easily find HCD UAE. So all of the, you can ask any question you like throughout, and you can vote for questions on this platform. I'd also ask you if you could add your name so we know who's asking. So if you have maybe a follow-up or anything, it'd be great if you could do that as well. And as I was saying, we're going to go the extra mile with the interactivity. Chris has got some poll questions, and I will share those separate links throughout the session, so at the right time. But you can join now, and you can start typing questions whenever you like throughout the talk. We'll address those at the end. So without further ado, welcome, Chris. If everyone could just mute all. Yeah, just give a very quick introduction. Obviously, Chris, you can introduce yourself. Chris is going to talk about the UX designers have a role in reducing digital waste, a really great topic, and I'm looking forward to hear from you. And I've known Chris for almost a decade now. It's quite exciting, since my early days in Abu Dhabi. He's the CEO at User Vision and the founder, and it's one of the UK's most experienced UX agencies, which has conducted hundreds of projects for clients worldwide, including many projects for leading businesses, charities, government organizations in the UK, throughout Europe and the Middle East. And he has been in, as I've been saying, in Dubai for over a decade and done a lot of great projects with many household names here in Dubai. So great to have you. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll pass over to you, Chris.
Okay, let me just try and do the screen share thing to make sure that we're all set. And okay, share. And is that working? Can you see that slide now?
We can see your screen.
Great. Okay, cool. Thanks. Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. Thanks for joining for the first meetup of 2022. And I must apologize for this bizarre lighting situation I've got. I'm talking to you from Edinburgh in Scotland, and in the bright streaming Scottish sun here, I must invest in getting some blinds for situations like this. So you probably get extreme brightness there, and I'm cloaked in darkness. But anyways, we'll carry on. Right. Let me just, you've done a little introduction to me. Yep. We're UX agency, do all those things you probably expect a user experience agency to do. We've been going for 21 years now. So it's been quite a variety of things that we've done, seen the industry evolve tremendously. You know, you can think of what it was like in 2000 to now. But we do a lot of understanding user needs, that end of pure sort of discovery type research, all the way through to things like the experience design and visualizing it. That could be, you know, the personas and journey maps, as well as the wireframing and prototyping, and then the experience design. Well, the evaluation side, typically things like usability testing, and even the fancy stuff like eye tracking, but actually quite a lot in accessibility as well, which is something that I found. We'll be making some references to that. I often, in my time, certainly over the past 15 years or so with a lot of exposure in Dubai, I've seen big gaps between the accessibility awareness and passion there compared to the UK. Be interested in your thoughts on that. So we do a lot of that in accessibility, inclusive design, and that's me, and that's me on Twitter, etc. Right, let's get into it. What do we want to get into what do I want to get out of this session? I'm actually presenting this as, yeah, it's a presentation. I'm going to be telling you some things, but I've also like to try and make it a discussion, and hopefully sparking off a few thoughts for you, and maybe some things for you to take away and think about with your colleagues, or maybe even your bosses. So I'm hoping that we're getting some maybe action fodder that comes from this, because I do think there is quite a potential for opportunity for actually doing things in this world of, if you want to call it, digital waste, or sustainable design, digital sustainable design. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what I'm calling digital waste. I'd like to find out at some point about how you individually or your team currently are considering it and controlling it. Is it on your radar at all? And that's some of the questions we'll be going through. And then I'm going to present some ideas about what can be done to reduce digital waste, and see, maybe armed with those, you can get a bit more traction wherever you are. So I'd like to find out if you think that these are achievable. Lots of these things, at the tactical level, yes, there's things you can do, but typically the barrier comes more when trying to do it at the management level. You get the politics, you get the other priorities that come in. So how can you actually position this so that it is attractive to the business and that they see the benefit out of it? Because like anything, unless the business actually decides to do that and invest in it, it's probably not going to go anywhere. So that's roughly my goals for the session. Hopefully that sounds okay. Now, so here's what we'll talk through. What is digital waste? I'll introduce it, and how much of a problem it is. And it is a growing problem. I'll just give you that as a heads up. And then how do you actually measure it? Any problem, you want to be able to quantify it in some way. So we'll talk about ways to measure that, which might be useful if you are going to have these kinds of discussions with colleagues. And then more at this kind of tactical level, what can be done? Now, I'd imagine with this kind of group, you're using this kind of big term of UXers. Now, there's typically a few varieties. I always consider like a spectrum of people that are more maybe at the user research end. Okay, so they might be experts in doing everything from I don't know, ethnography and surveys and understanding user needs, interviews, etc. And then maybe at the other end, more the design side. Okay, and if they are, a lot of the things we're going to be talking about is more relevant for, I'd say, that design end of that spectrum, if you see it that way. But I've got some good resources I'll tell you about where you can learn some more. And of course, feel free to ask me questions during and after. So what is digital waste? Digital waste is something that, despite these good resources I'll tell you about, none of them seem to give a good definition of it. So I made up my own, and that is their digital waste. I call it is the excess negative impact on the natural environment that results from the production of or consumption of digital products or services. And feel free to iterate on that definition and make it better. When you look into it, there's two main elements to it. One is more physical. We can call that the electronic waste, or the e-waste. And this is the unrecycled equipment that goes into the ground. I've got about 3 phones sitting over there that, well, they're never going to get used again. And, but this kind of thing, always trying to keep up with getting the latest, greatest thing, and asking the question, do we actually need to be doing that? And I'm actually slightly proud over the fact that I'm using what is now considered a vintage MacBook Pro, because it's from like 2015, so something that's 6 years old is considered, in the world of digital, is considered, vintage. My phone is a S7. It must be at least 6 years old as well. It does the job well enough. So always trying to get the latest and greatest thing. It does have a tremendous, tremendous physical waste. All of this, all the microchips, silicon chips, having to be dug out of the ground, everything. That is a huge part of it. Now that, as important as that is, I'm kind of putting that to the side for today because I want to concentrate on the second one, which is actually a bit less visible, but I'd say no less important, and that is the data waste. So the data that is useless really has no value, but it's produced anyway, because we have this inherent feeling that creating something, producing something, look, I'm creating data, I'm creating reports, I'm doing these things, without actually asking the question is it valuable? Who's the recipient? Are they using it? Is it useful for them? So splitting between those two, we're going to concentrate more on the data waste. And why is it waste? Well, most of it is not ever used. It's estimated over 80% of electronics become e-waste. Most of that is never recycled. It is just kind of burned in some landfills in other sides of the world. But also 90% of data is not used again 3 months after it's first stored. And you can compare that to your own organization, your own personal habits. I know myself personally, I've got thousands of unread emails and I really need to tidy up. Every so often I go through and I get that cathartic cleanup of my emails. And that's a key thing of getting rid of that data waste. That's fine on an individual basis. How do we raise that on the sort of a business corporate way and get them to see the benefit to that as well? Because once again, unless they see the benefit, it's going to get lip service at best. So data waste, concentrating on that, it is growing. And just some numbers to kind of back it up. The world's data centers use more electricity than the UK. It now consumes about 3% of global electricity supply and 2% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Now that's a lot right now, but it will be growing. So, people talk about the airline industry and don't fly, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is about the same as the airline industry. And if it was a country, it would be the seventh largest polluter up there in parallel with Germany. And it's going to be rising a lot. It's going to be up to 14% by 2040. Now that is just tremendous. So you can see that, you can put that in graphs and stuff just to see it. If the internet was a country, it would be producing about the same amount of CO2 emissions as Germany. So that should catch people's attention. And I think it's important to do that because we have this, I think, naive view that, well, it's all up in the cloud. The cloud sounds nice and fluffy and, nice place to go. Let's stick things up there. Well, this cloud, as nice as it might be, where you're storing all your data, does require things here on terra firma, on Earth, to actually run it. Lots of electricity. And especially depending on how that electricity is generated, that could be very, say, carbon hostile. Let's talk about you and our profession. As I said, maybe some of you are more user research oriented and some of you are more design oriented and maybe some are doing both. Great. A lot of people, especially the designers, if you think who you're actually designing for, and you can think about this in your own personal evolution and look at your organization. Very often, a lot of times people start off, especially in design, they get into it because they're really good. They like making interesting pictures. They might be into the digital side and be experts in, Photoshop or whatever the platform might be. And a lot of it is kind of satisfying your own curiosity and your artistic ambitions, et cetera. And so typically you're, as a young designer, your initial customer might be you, and that's who you're designing it for. But once you hit the hard reality of the world and having to make a living, you find that you're having to compromise. You're having to design for your organization, okay? And they will have, business goals, and they will have, platforms, et cetera, that need to be built. So you'll be putting your best skills towards that organization and trying to design various channels and platforms for them. And hopefully you can find a happy compromise there. But most organizations are finding that they benefit by really having a good think about the end user and making sure that whatever gets designed is not overly weighted by the corporate content and organization and mindset and information architecture, et cetera, but really trying to get under the skin of the end users, hence this wonderful world of user research and doing some primary research to find out what they need and checking throughout the design to make sure that you're staying oriented towards what those end users need. So typically, those are the people that we're designing for. we're designing for, the organization, but to make it really work for them, we're designing for the end user. That's why we're sort of experts in doing that and really understanding their needs. But the question that is, I'd like to kind of throw out as a kind of rhetorical question throughout this talk is, should we, or do we want to actually be designing for more widely? What about society beyond the end user per se? What about designing for society and actually making society a bit better? And part of that is the whole environmental initiative as well. So that's just some general background questions to think about, and that can introduce our first poll question. And here's where Jonathan and I are going to do a wonderful little tag team to launch a poll question. Now we'll launch it, and if you can answer it, and we might have a good look at the answers at these at the end. I think that's the plan, Jonathan. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like to maybe think about, on your current project, to what degree do you or your team, depend on your situation, act on digital waste impact of the product that you are creating? So how much is it on your radar? Is it discussed frequently? Is it discussed at all? So gave you a little bit of a spectrum there of 5 different points. And it'd be interesting to see what people think. I've done this, I should say, this talk is one that I gave about 3 months ago here in the UK. And I was surprised. It was for a UX conference. I was surprised. I can't remember the numbers, but the number of people that were saying it was either considered or strongly considered was a bit higher than I expected. But obviously the UAE is a different place, might have different attitudes. So whatever your impression is, this is not highly scientific. Please do that. Now, Jonathan, you'll probably have a view of what our numbers are of how many have completed the poll, et cetera. I can't really see that. So you can call it quits.
We've got 9 folks, but so yeah, just to reiterate, we will be, if you've joined us recently, we will be taking some poll questions throughout the session, and you can also ask Q&A questions. So the first link I shared was the Slido link with HCD UAE, and I've just shared another link with the poll, and we've got, I think, 12 answers. So if everyone could answer that, we've got 29 participants, so it'd be great to get a few more. That'd be great. If you just click on the link in the chat and answer, it's the same question as you see on the screen. And Chris is going to do this throughout, so that would be great. Thanks.
I think we got 4 questions. So yeah, just have a think. Do you think, is it really considered? What we could do is, there's another poll question that I'm going to be doing afterwards, and here it is. So if you've done that first one, who do you think has the responsibility for sort of being green in the digital world? And on this one, hopefully it's more like a checkbox rather than a radio button. You can choose more than one. It could be the consumer of the data, the end user, or the producers, the creators of the product, the hosting company who's hosting the product. It could be, the government, more in the terms of rules and regulations, or maybe it could be all of the above. So just give a little answer to that, and we'll have a quick squiz a quick look at the answers of those later on.
Great, I've added both of them to the chat.
Great. Okay, well, everyone can do those in their own time, in a separate window or whatever. Let's get into a bit more, dig into how you can actually measure these things, because if you do try to raise the idea, you probably will be asked, well, these kinds of things, how do we know, how are we doing, et cetera. So the primary goal in sustainable web design is typically to reduce carbon emissions. We're always hearing about carbon emissions, as the key metric for greenhouse gases. So the primary metrics that could be used as indicators are data transfer, and then the second one is the carbon intensity of the electricity. So they're two separate things. One is a bit more to, let's say, I would say the data transfer, you can consider that more about sort of the front end of the presentation of, let's say, a website or an app. The carbon intensity of the electricity, consider that more like the back end. That's where we're going to start talking about things like your server farms, where they're located, how they're powered, et cetera. The first one is what we're going to concentrate on a little bit more. the kilowatt hours per gigabyte is the metric of energy efficiency for that amount of data that's transferred over the internet. So as you all know, every time you send an email, send one of your, 20 gigabyte photos that you've taken with an iPhone or whatever, it is 20 megabyte rather. It's these things do take electricity to be sent, and all of that is going to end up being part of the carbon emissions. So just to give a few ideas of it, data transfer for a single visit can be estimated by just looking at the page weight. That is the transfer size of a page in kilobytes. For the first time that someone visits the page, we're kind of assuming that things get cached and that there isn't a need to keep downloading that single page. Things are a little bit different if you've got one of these dynamic pages that's bringing down bits of data. If it's one of these kind of information sites that's done in that way. But typically, it's the first download of the page. The page weight has risen greatly over the past 10 years. You could say that it's almost the wider you make the pipes, the broadband through which we're serving all this data, well, just as quickly it gets filled up with the data. It's almost like cars and roads, isn't it? So the page weight has risen greatly over the past 10 years. Some good background data there on from HTTP archive, and you can see just going back about 10 years ago, it was less than 1K. Now it's these things have basically doubled in the past 10 years, and will be growing a lot more. So what can be done, and there's obviously millions of pages out there, control what you have, what you can control. How do you actually measure the weight of a page? You can consider that the data transfer size. Page weight budgets. If you start talking about budgets that often, especially for the management type people, they might relate to that and sit up and say, okay, hang on, what are we talking about here? Page weight budgets is something that can be tracked throughout design and development. And like most budgets, there's no, they're a goal to aim for. You can't stay within that budget and you have to go over a little bit. Well, okay, it's probably not the end of the world, but it gives you a clear, tangible goal of what to be aiming for. And just that in its own self, in its own way, will help fixate minds and hopefully get everyone pulling in the same direction. So it's a proxy measure to indicate the efficiency relative to other websites. And I think this relative to other websites is pretty important, because you can tap into the sort of competitive streak that might exist in many of the sort of management management people for your teams. Are we doing better than some of our competitors? And use that to your advantage. So the median web size of a page increased by roughly 30%. And what you can do is actually benchmark your weight against some of your competitors, or perhaps your old version of the website. If you're going through a site redesign, see if, okay, whatever we do in our redesign, amongst the many things our new site's going to do, we're going to try and reduce our page weight, our average page weight, by whatever. Set a goal, 20%, 25%. And you can also try and set some warning sign. Your maximum page weight has to be equal to, again, you refer to one of your competitors, or set the benchmark lower. Because if you do, then maybe you can use that to your own advantage. So another little poll question to think about that point specifically: does your organization monitor the page weight of your web pages during design? So there's a lot going on during the design and development. Is it actually something that you take account of and maybe have set some goals for on that? So just more of a kind of rhetorical question on that one. Could you set a goal relative to the competitors in your industry? That's one that I seem to be recommending. And just say, we're going to try and do better than those. And then if so, maybe we can actually use that to our advantage and shout about it a little bit. Okay.
Sorry, we've just had folks have been streaming nonstop for the last half hour. So I just want to for anyone who's just joined us, we've got in the chat of quite a few polls that we've been asking. And even if you've just joined us, I'm sure, in time, not necessarily straight away, but if you could answer those. If you do have any questions, I noticed somebody, or even if it could be a comment as well, it doesn't have to be a question. If you could please put that into Slido .io. So you can just join the hashtag HCD UAE, or I'll just add again, I'm not sure, like the general Q&A and comments even. It doesn't have to be a question, because it's what we will look at the end for having a more of a general discussion. If you could add those in there, that would be great. Back to you, Chris. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So there's, remember, the heavier the page, the more environmental impact it's going to be having. And you may have measured your own page weight. You might have your own tools for doing that. Of course, most content management systems will give you a way to do that, but you can also just do it through a simple website. I think there's a few of them that do this, but this is my favorite one. You can just go to your website, put in a URL, and find out your website's carbon impact. And of course, you could do that with one of your competitor sites or peer sites and see how you're doing against them. And just that might generate a bit of discussion within your organization. So the average web page tested produces 1.76 kilograms per page view. That's according to the average done by the website Carbon Calculator. So if you had a decent amount of traffic, let's say 10,000 monthly page views, that's 211 kilograms per year. So once you start talking that as a metric, kilograms of CO2, that's a common metric. We hear that all the time with automobile emissions and airplanes, et cetera. And at least now we're all speaking from the same unit. And that's quite useful. You can start having a more sort of intelligent conversation about that to try and drive the initiative forward, if you do indeed think that it could be something that you'd like to take on. And some websites will do better than others. You can see here that this particular BBC site there was getting a bit of a red card. It's dirtier than 74% of web pages tested. Now, just simplifying it down to that is really, I think, very powerful to know how you're comparing to the majority of the other web pages out there. And I think that very great simplification could motivate people. And also, they're breaking it down, the number of CO2 equivalent, number of trees, etc. And then there's other ones that are doing much, much better. And that's Rights for Children. It's a website, obviously much smaller than the BBC site, but worth actually trying to find out how you're doing using something like the website Carbon Calculator. So what can actually be done? And we will get into some of the real specific tactical things that can be done. I've tried to break them down into sort of two camps, those that are a bit more towards the design side and those that are a bit more towards the development side. So maybe a bit more, again, front end, back end sides once again. But you may have heard of the Sustainable Web Manifesto. It gives sustainable web projects some goals, some high-level goals that I think are quite clear, because it breaks down this rather large abstract idea of sustainability, digital sustainability, into some more, a bit more resolution to it. So what are these elements of the Sustainable Web Manifesto, which, by the way, you can just go onto that website, check it out, learn more, and sign it. And the more people that sign it, it's bound to be a good thing. It's just showing a bit of momentum. But the 6 goals that are part of the Sustainable Web Manifesto to orientate yourself is, first of all, it should be clean. It's better to use renewable energy sources, solar, wind, etc., than dirty ones. So, coal, for instance. So find a host that commits to using 100% renewable energy in their data centers. Now, you can ask within your organization, is this something that you can influence? It's something you should be able to pretty quickly find out whether or not whoever's hosting your site or sites is actually doing it in a sustainable way. You can just go to their website. Some of them might declare that they are. You can dig into that and find that out. So find out, whatever is powering the data center that's hosting your website, how sustainable is it? Is it based on renewable? The second thing is efficient. Now, developers often copy and paste entire libraries of code when only what you're needing is maybe 20 lines or something. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit more, but there's a real problem with this just because it's easy to grab, copy, and save and upload, a lot of stuff gets put into web pages, apps that are just making them big and bloated. So I'll be talking a bit later on about doing let's say a JavaScript audit, things like this, letting old unnecessary lines of clutter clutter up the code. And I certainly know certain clients that are guiltily aware of the fact that their code is a bit of a spaghetti junction mess of old stuff that no one wants to actually take the time or be brave enough to try and say, well, this stuff actually isn't needed. It's really unpicking it all. So you want to make it much more efficient. And of course, all these things have an impact on the end user because things will download more quickly. Another one is being open. Now, this one's interesting. I think the attitude towards openness is really critical to actually make this happen, because that lets us benchmark and learn from each other. And now that this very beginning idea of sustainability on the web, or digital sustainability, it's very much in its embryonic beginning stages right now with talks like mine, and I'll introduce you to people like Jerry McGovern, who's been a real driver in this later on as one of the resources. How do we actually make this part of the conversation in our industry? How do we make this part of something that people are aware of at the very least? And some companies will publish their estimated emissions per page view. That's an interesting thought. Imagine saying, well, this page here we estimate that it's going to be generating 1.2 grams to 3.6 grams of CO2 per page view. Now, I happen to know where this page is, and you can follow that link to see it. Most pages clearly don't have that sort of thing. But the fact that they are trying to publish that, it's trying to do its bit to raise awareness of it. And if you do grasp the nettle of this and say, well, we want to actually make a thing out of this sustainability, that might be a good way to actually do that, to actually make a feature out of this. So check out that website about and see how does Future Planet count carbon, and you can see that little note on that. So it might be something that you could actually put on sort of the bottom of the pages. And the parallel that I came up with, for those of you that are familiar with accessibility, you will have seen quite a growth in the past 15, 20 years in the awareness and, actually more importantly, the action being taken on accessibility. Now, some of that is through through desire. We want to make our websites accessible. There's good benefits. It's getting a wider audience. Some of that is driven perhaps more by a stick type of thing. Certainly here in the UK, we do have a legislative framework under the Equality Act that essentially is encouraging companies to make their websites accessible. The big question is, what will count as accessible? Typically, most people are kind of assuming it means level AA of the WCAG guidelines, 2.1 at the moment. And certainly all the government websites and most banks and large clients that we're dealing with typically will be aiming for level AA of it. And certainly within government, there's a lot of mandating of, we have to make sure that these, if you don't, then the people from the central government in the UK will come around and check what your processes, procedures are like, and what your website's like, and you'll get a bit of an admonishment from the central government for not actually keeping your website accessible enough. So in the world of accessibility, it has matured to that level, whereas 15 years ago, it really wasn't typically on the radar for many, many companies. Maybe sustainability could be driven in that way. I know it's a different sort of legislative environment and environment in general there in the UAE than the UK, but just it might be something to think about. I do see a parallel between the accessibility side and in this digital sustainability. The next one to consider is actually being honest. And what that's really saying is what they call greenwashing, tweaking the numbers. So if you are going to do it, don't do what maybe what was it, about 5 years ago, VW kind of shot themselves in the foot when they were shouting about how great their VW diesel things were, but they were actually tweaking the numbers and they weren't very clean at all. They were doing some things to make themselves look greener than they were. They got in trouble and all sorts of things happened there. So measure it honestly, give references to third-party sources, perhaps that website carbon calculator, and report it honestly. And so be honest in that way. Another thing you might want to think about, and this could be something to tie in with maybe the corporate website, corporate social responsibility type idea as well. That's certainly a good vehicle for many initiatives like this to happen, is to be regenerative. There's something called Redemptive Technologies. I like that term. It's maybe helping to heal the planet and people. And perhaps the highest profile one of that is Ecosia, which is a search engine that uses their profit. They do have advertising, they make some money, and they plant trees. That's their key metric. And it's a perfectly good search engine. I've used it alongside Google, and it works perfectly well. So you could do that and feel good about doing your searches, and maybe a tree will get planted if you do enough searches. So that type of thing. What that's really talking about is, if you are going to be doing trying to minimize your digital waste, tell them what you're trying to do with that. With the CO2 that you're not emitting. What kind of efforts the company's making. And the final one is resilient. We want things to be served in a good, reliable way. We want good web connections, et cetera. And basically the smaller the web page, typically the simpler the web page, it's going to be far more resilient. And whether that is you going through a train tunnel and having to lose the signal for a bit, or think of sort of natural disaster areas, the smaller and more simple we can make those web pages, the better. And I know a lot of this crosses over with general good user experience. We all want fast download pages, et cetera. So those are the high-level sustainable website manifesto ideas, and you can learn some more on their own website. Thinking about it again in general before we get into specifics, could you, or maybe you are already, a sustainability champion within the organization? What if a website, a web project, digital project, I should say, had at least one person who understands the issues at quite a deep level? You can look at some of the resources I'll mention at the end, and that they could have that conversation with the right people in the organization to actually drive this forward, to actually ask them, okay, why are our pages so big? Look, our competitors are doing better in this regard. And again, I'd say take advantage of that competition with your competitors to drive it along. So what can you do to consider sustainability at every stage of the project? So have a think about that. If you or one of your colleagues would like to be a sustainability champion, and raise that idea, it could be a really good addition to extension to the pure user experience, designing the product itself, trying to get that on the agenda. So if you are doing that, you want to try and set some kind of sustainability benchmark, budget. Benchmark, as I've mentioned a few times, against your current version or maybe your competitor's websites. Try and do an estimate of what is possible. Look at your page weight. You can use your CMS or some other tools to do that, and try and just consider, what can we do? Do we actually need to have these videos? Videos tend to be really big in terms of file size. Custom web fonts. I'll be talking about some of these in a little bit more detail. All of these have that marginal extra download of data that's needed. And just like in many sports, you're trying to get your marginal gains. You make enough small marginal gains and it starts to add up. Tracking scripts. So many companies I know, clients of ours, no one really looks at the tracking scripts or even the Google Analytics half the time. I bet you're collecting a lot of data through these tracking scripts that is never actually used. So once again, just ask the question, why is that there? Do we actually need it? Does anyone look at that? And the answer may be, actually, no one's really looking at that. Let's just get rid of it. Set your page weight budget and maybe set a stretch goal, for, what if we could do that, 10% better, what it would be. So I mentioned that achieving sustainability through a couple different ways. It's one is design. I've kind of split it into design and development. And so design ideas is trying to just be as minimalist as possible. And that is the minimalist approach is not necessarily easy, because it's much easier to create things than to actually take them down once they've been launched onto the website or onto the world of digital, but justify the existence of every detail of the work that you're producing. Instead of asking, would it be nice to add this thing? maybe ask, can actually we live without it? There is, I think, an inherent design fear of missing out. We have to add on some kind of extra widget, some extra content because someone out there might actually want it. And the problem is, and this relates actually to another, another aspect of a good user experience, and it's especially related to, let's say, information architecture, is the idea of top tasks, and actually trying to design around what are the actual tasks that your end users are really wanting to do. And often there's a gap between what the organization is assuming or hoping that people will want to do and what people really want to do. And there's a few different ways. We use a method that is pioneered by Jerry McGovern, who I'm going to mention later on. That's called top tasks, and you get a good beat on a good idea of what is it that the tasks are that people want to do, and design your content, your functionality for that, much more so than the other things, which ends up just being a lot of content gets put on that ends up just being, trying to find, makes it hard for a person to hard to find their content they're looking for. So don't worry about the fear of missing out. Try and minimize it. Now, it's probably not only going to be based on CO2 in the environment. That probably won't motivate everyone or many people on that. So think of the other things. By actually minimizing that page load, et cetera, we're going to create a better online experience. It's going to load faster. It's just going to be easier to access, faster to develop. That should appeal as well, and a more streamlined experience. So there's things that can be done, many specific things. I won't read through all of these, but I'll give you a few examples of some of them. Do look closely at the user's journey, try and reduce the number of things like gateway pages and what I call pogo stick navigation, where you end up having to go to sort of a central hub of, it could be a list of articles and going back and forth. Try and minimize that. There's ways, again, this is information architecture to do that. Streamline it and reducing content. As we all know and experience, we want to read less online. We read more slowly. We just want a quick summary typically. There's a lot that can be done in the world of imagery. I'll show you some examples of that. And then the file size. There's a lot of changes that are happening in file sizes, image formats, and things like WebP, which is one of the more efficient ones. It's been around for a while, but hasn't had as much uptake as I might hope. It is typically smaller than JPEG, which is used by many. You can use various programs to optimize the images, and even blurring them and using vector images, which are typically much smaller file size. Even the colors will make a difference. So all of these things. And if this is just a brief summary, and if you want to have a little bit more depth in it, you can go into that link. The people that put together a book about sustainable web design is called Whole Grain Digital. They're based here in the UK. A lot of really good resources there on their website that really are kind of in addition to what I'm talking about here. So what I mean about things like allowing the user journey to be a bit more direct. An example is here from John Lewis, which is a big retailer here in the UK and sell worldwide. But if I was looking for headphones, the way that their dropdown works is if I do make the correct guess that it's probably going to be somewhere given those options in electricals, I get the mega dropdown. That's what I call this type of thing, where it does give the subcategories. That's fine. They've got that into 5 subcategories. But what it gives me sort of a double step preview. I can actually see that next level. I can actually see headphones within sound and vision. So I don't have to actually make a guess like, gosh, would headphones be under, it could be computing. It could be computing headphones. And I go and make a wrong guess there. I'm getting that kind of far preview. It's kind of like putting on your high beams when you're driving. You can see a bit further ahead. So that's one way, by allowing, yes, it's just one less click, but it's also a bit less of the user getting lost. So most of these things work hand in hand with more direct access to what you're looking for leads to a more satisfied customer, better user experience. Photos are a real opportunity to really reduce that file size and that CO2 emission. So that photo on the right, I actually think it looks a little bit more interesting with the blurred edges. It kind of makes the little pony stand out a bit more, but it's 47% smaller than the one on the left, simply because the edges are blurred. And it's going to be an aesthetic taste, but that is really significant, half the size almost, by just blurring the edges. And really, especially if it's just, you know, an image, an incidental image, there's a great opportunity there to reduce those file sizes. One of my favorite phrases, it applies in digital and lots of areas in life, is if you can't fix it, feature it. And I think this is an opportunity to actually feature what you are doing. If you are trying to see this challenge and meet this challenge, well, actually show people what you're actually trying to do. You could show off your sustainability credentials. And there's some companies like Organic Basics is one here. They're specialist retailers in eco-friendly underwear. So, well, they're in the world of trying to be eco-friendly in their products. So, you know, why don't we actually carry that over? Into the website. And they've got, it's a really interesting website to look at. You can see what their carbon intensity, they have a little chat there about, their carbon intensity is low. So this is them making reference to what's their web server doing right now. And this is that sort of behind the scenes side to it. So not so much that front end, but that back end. And they're continually adapting it. So like many things when you're shopping online, the more you can get that consumer to feel good about the fact that they're shopping there and feeling good about themselves, the fact that they're shopping with you, the better. And there's a lot of, I think, quite compelling and attractive content in that. And they even take it to the point where, yes, you might want to look at full images, colored images of the underwear that you're thinking of buying. But if you generally know what the underwear is like, maybe you're reordering it, et cetera, you can just go with these little GIF kind of images, and they're really small. So yeah, check out Organic Basics as a real kind of minimalist, but still I think very attractive and compelling and successful kind of company that's making the most of the sustainability. And there's just a bit more about them. They've got a low impact version of their site. And that's where those images are from. So perhaps you could have a low impact version of your website and feature that. Hey, by going to this version of it, you're getting the exact same content, but you're potentially, we estimate that you'll be saving X amount of kilobytes or X amount of CO2. And that makes the visitor, that user experience a little bit better. They'll feel good about themselves, the fact that they're doing that. You've saved this amount of CO2 so far. Okay, so that's a few examples of things you can do at the design side. We talked about fonts. Fonts can make a big difference. Image formats as well. There's a lot more to the image font formats and a few different options there. And what about the development side? So what about once you're under the hood of your website? Okay, and there's some things you can do. You can simplify the logic of the scripting, et cetera, to reduce the number and complexity of the queries, basically. Can you code the website without bloated libraries? That once again, those huge libraries. Tracking scripts, do you actually need them? Could you compress your code? Can you block bots? Bots often use up to 50% of the processing bandwidth. And even the language matters. There's a little thing that C++ are less energy efficient than some of these other ones. So I would think a good place to start is to ask the question, could we do a JavaScript audit? And I described that before. Often huge screeds of JavaScript are grabbed where only a very much small minority of stuff is actually needed from within that. So forensically look at and unpick your JavaScript and decide what's needed. Then have a think about your hosting. Is it green? Is it really green? And find out from them. Said we've got these 3.7% of the world's carbon emissions. It's going to grow and grow. A first stop to that would be to actually, what can we do to reduce that? And a lot of this will be reducing the file size. But when you do have to be spending that energy, let's try and make it as renewable energy as possible. So you can do things. I checked out who's hosting our website, and they say that their data center is based in the UK and powered by 100% renewable energy. Okay, so, and I know that there's many that aren't. So that's a good, relatively simple question to ask and answer. So I know we're coming up towards the hour here, and I guess I'd like to, I'm not sure how we're going to handle this, Jonathan, but I can ask these questions, and maybe if we have time for a little bit of a chat, I'll just put up the questions that I think are worth thinking about now, talking about now. Certainly take them away and think about yourselves afterwards and discuss with your colleagues. What do you think are the main barriers to actually trying to aim for sustainable web design in your company? Could you perform some of these audits targeted at removing content and therefore reducing the hosting costs and storage? Do you think your company or organization could turn this into a feature, could attract or please customers by actually featuring their efforts that they're making on improving digital sustainability, and doing it in an honest way? And what's the best route to advance this in your organization? Is it through corporate social responsibility, talking to the right people? Obviously, it's going to vary depending on what kind of company that you're working with. But those are the main things that I think we can ask. I told you I'd get to some resources. I'll show you those in just one slide. One last poll question, if we're able to drop that in there. And this is one where, do you think changes could be made at your organization so that designing for reduced digital waste could be part of the agenda for future digital projects? So this is a kind of all-encompassing, do you think it could actually happen? And if we can have a think as to why or why not, and maybe a little bit of a chat on that as well. In terms of the resources, a couple of really good ones to get started. I've mentioned the website Carbon Calculator. There's also the Green Web Foundation is worth looking at as well. Check if your hosting is green. And these two books, one is Sustainable Web Design by Whole Grain Digital, and one from Jerry McGovern, who's a well-known figure in the world of UX, especially in the world of IA and top tasks and things like that. So yeah, those are a couple of resources. I'd say check those out and have a good read of that to really learn a bit more about that. Now, it is an evolving topic as this grows, and I do see it could be a bit more like accessibility. 15 years ago, people weren't very aware of it. It's not perfect now by any means, but they're much more aware of it now. So what could be done about it? You'll have my contact details, so please keep in touch and any suggestions or questions. And I just will say, in terms of doing an audit, you can do it internally. We also have a digital waste audit product or service that we're creating in partnership with Jerry McGovern. It focuses just at top level, 4 different areas: culture, devices, websites or platforms, and then communication. And if you'd like to learn more a bit about that, we're kind of putting finishing touches on that and going to be kind of rolling that out a bit later on this year. So I'll be glad to tell you about that. I saw some interesting chat in the chat about, I think someone was saying that, yeah, many companies are just more interested in content and images for clients these days. They prefer the high-res images and they ignore it because they assume high internet speed. And of course, not everyone will have that high internet speed. But that's one comment. Jonathan, maybe at this stage I could hand off to you. I'm going to go back to these let's discuss questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I'll should we look at those let's discuss, or do you want to look at some of the poll answers?
If you're able to share the polls, let me see.
Yeah, I can share that. Maybe if you could stop sharing.
So I'll stop sharing. Yep, over to you.
And I will just show the results. We had 20 answers to the first one, and I will share the screen. Here we go. You can see that?
Yeah.
So it's not that surprising, to be honest. I did chat to Chris about this before we started in terms of just the maturity of thought I feel in this region in terms of sustainability, even going beyond that to like corporate social responsibility, and compared to other areas of the world, even things like recycling, I feel have a long way to go in terms of being top of mind for your average person in, I think, the Middle East as an emerging area. But does that surprise you, Chris?
No, it doesn't. And I know I've spent a lot of time there in Dubai, and I know the general background attitude towards environmental things, I think, in general. And that doesn't surprise me at all. No.
So let's look at the second one. It's great that this worked, by the way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I was saying to Chris, we only have 3 questions in the free version, and we had to do a quiz for the last one, but hopefully that quiz worked. Well, I think we got 6 answers now, so that's good. Who do you think has responsibility for being green in the digital world?
Yeah,
The
good.
producer, creators of the product.
That's encouraging that, you know, many people think all of the above, but the leading one is the creators of the product. That's good.
Quite even though.
Yeah.
And we had 15 on the next one. Does the organization monitor the page weight of your pages during the design?
That's still, you know, quite low, and you know, maybe we'd like to see that in a year or two's time being much more like, you know, up to 40-50%, I think.
Yeah, it's a good benchmark, right? We can poll again next year.
From a small poll.
Yeah, from a very not statistically significant. And the last one, we've got 6 responses.
Okay.
I know, like, yes, I realized it was a quiz. I kind of got a way around paying $100 to Slido, because they forced you to do a year, that you can't do a month and cancel. So majority of people said highly likely, which is also
that's really good. Look at that. Well, that's what a great great thing to finish on. That, do you think it could be you could you know, rally everyone to be part of the future agenda, and likely and highly likely?
Yeah, 88%.
Well, that's really encouraging, and I wish you all the you know, all the luck and success in doing that. I think that's really encouraging. Yeah.
Let's
Well, that's really good.
move on maybe to the Q&A.
Yeah.
And we've got, how are we on time? We've got a little bit more time. So we'll start at the top. Gareth is asking, I have comments from devs often about page size and speed, but it's very much performance driven rather than waste. I guess the lighter
That's
the page,
again, they're working hand in hand, you know. The lighter the page, well, 2 things: it's the size of the page, but also its complexity. If you're having to make multiple server calls, etc., you know, convoluted things, that's going to slow it down as well. But you know, the more you can say, this is, you're sort of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, or whatever it is. That's great.
I might just go off script here, because I know Gareth did say he's got plenty of opinions. So I mean, did you want to add anything to that? I'm going to ask you to unmute, or did you have any other follow-up questions?
I always find I guess it's going to be an interesting conversation, isn't it? And I think, you know, as internet speeds get faster, as content gets more rich, does the world go in a direction of even richer content, or is it go in the opposite direction and go simpler and simpler as people's attention spans get more and more, you know, fought for, I guess you could say. I've got a habit of uploading, you know, like high resolution images to my Figma and XD files, which is a really bad habit. But yeah, I think no doubt there will be legislation in place fairly soon that limits the size of digital assets, or at least there is almost a taxation on big offenders. I mean, you looked at China as the biggest digital waste producer. It's almost like those, you know, taxes need to be applied and penalties need to be applied for those who do the offending. I'm not quite so convinced, you know, me and my small design agency is going to make the biggest difference, but that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't do it, just like recycling and everything, all of the other things that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, good. Every little bit helps, you know. So just, I think there's so much just by putting it on the agenda. I think, you know, in terms of running an agency, in order to, you know, a lot of it is trying to make yourself look on the cutting edge, and just actually entering that into the conversation is bound to reflect well on you, I think, you know. Even if they don't take it up, it shows that you're aware of this growing issue. And I think that's something.
I think page speeds is is still and always has been a big issue, right? And even now, now that we live in like lightning internet speeds, it feels really bad when a page takes a long time to load.
Yeah.
There's an agency in London who I'm a big fan of and speak to their directors to occasionally. And I noticed their website takes about 20 seconds to load up.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, you know.
Yeah, it depends on where it's hosted. And, you know, assuming Lightning web pages, we're all, you know, happen to be living in probably very well-connected places, but, you know, where some of my favorite work is when we're doing work for organizations that are, you know, spread out around the world. And you know, we've done testing with people in remote testing in Bangladesh and Nigeria and Brazil and places with really dodgy connections. And you can really see the effect of it then. So trying to get people to think beyond, and there are certain ways to kind of mimic what these slower throttled connections are like. And I think it's worth reminding people of that. Yeah. Good.
Cool. So we've got requests for some future events. It's going a little bit out of our kind of core human-centered design. I'm sure you can apply human-centered design to pretty much anything. But thanks for the suggestion. We will take it on board. If you know a speaker, please reach out. The next question you've kind of touched upon already, but from Dima saying, when can we hope for some accountability in this space? And is there a talk for some kind of digital waste tax?
Yeah, well, you know, picking up on, I think Gareth mentioned about, you know, what can you do to make a bit more of a stick? You know, with the whole COP26 or whatever, all these kinds of the new regulations, governments are having to sign up and make a promise that we're going to be cutting emissions, and they in turn are having to turn around to companies to say, what are you doing to actually reduce your emissions? And even affects, you know, agencies as well. You know, they're having to be asked, you know, what are you doing you know, to reduce your emissions? And I'm just saying that as I know that often when we're bidding for government projects, they're saying, okay, you know, 10% of your thing is going to be based on what are you actually trying to do to reduce even, you know, things like your impact on the environment. And you have to do some thinking like, what are we doing to you know, reduce our impact on the environment? And one of those could be, you know, we're actually taking really proactive effects, you know, steps on this. So it is kind of a trickle down. Governments are being forced to, you know, measure it and then ask, okay, down at the company level, what can be done? So it's not. I think we're a few steps away from it being tied up into really clear legislation, but I think there's movements to try and get it to trickle down to motivate people.
Cool. Interesting one. Paperless and saving trees. Is there any proof that paperless does result in carbon decrease?
Well, I mean, things I didn't really talk about is it better? For instance, I didn't talk about like Zoom meetings and things like this. And there is a lot to be said about Zoom meetings. It's certainly better to be doing these than everyone jumping on planes and flying anywhere, just by huge margins. This is tons better than that. But even within the world of, you know, Zoom meetings and stuff, you can turn off your videos, et cetera, and make a huge drop. And there's some good data about that in the number of emissions. So paperless, does it actually result in carbon decrease? It most likely will in a big way, because you aren't actually having to produce a physical product. That just like that, talking about, you know, getting your latest iPhone, et cetera, that physical production of something takes a huge amount of energy and its transport from one place to the next. So yes, digital will be less, you know, will have less carbon intensity than physical or you know, physical travel and things like that. But we can still do better.
And the final one is, do you have any recommendations, great way to end, on courses for I don't like this term, so I'm going to say designer, could take to learn about digital waste, sustainability, design? I mean, you recommended some great books there, but beyond that.
Yep. Well, Jeremy McGovern actually does I think he's starting to run a course on this. I think I have seen a course on that. So he's running a training course. I think I'm not sure when the next one is, but I do believe that there's something there. So if you Google that, if you go to his website, you can find out a bit more about that and maybe join that. It'll be remotely delivered. And if you have not had the pleasure of seeing or listening to Jerry McGovern, he's quite interesting, quite opinionated, and forceful in his talks, but he's quite compelling, and I'm sure it'll be a really good course as well.
Cool. And a final one. Just wanted to hand over to Gareth. Did want to share with the community that he's starting a YouTube channel. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? I think like what would be it's great to hear you doing stuff, and I think it'd be like as we were chatting before we started, you know, the more we can create a community in Dubai, which is a real challenge. I've almost a decade now since I started this meetup, and even though I went back and still supported from Australia and continued, I think what's missing is exactly what we had today, which is folks like Chris who come back, send their teams to the community, and you have regulars and you can build on the conversation. It's not just a 101, what is, you know, every single month. And it'd be great, Gareth, for you to, I mean, if we have podcasts, you know, we had someone who did a Slack channel. Unfortunately, he moved back to Europe and that kind of died. But Dubai is a transient place. But the more of, you know, folks who are going to stick around here that can, I think, make it a better community, to build better it is for everyone. And there's always a big element of, you know, that introduction. So if you've got classes or courses or videos, like, yeah, I'd love for you to share that with everyone that's still around.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So basically, Jonathan, what I did when I was fortunate enough to get a year's work placement when I was at university in London. I wasn't in London. I got my work placement in London for a magazine. And that year was no doubt the most important year of my life because I turned into a graphic designer rather than a student. And I always had the mindset of wanting to help other students get placements. And I then got essentially a visiting tutor job at my hometown university because of trying to make that initiative happen. Anyway, I still keep in touch with them. And when I go back to the UK, I go in and I show the students work, and I've got a relationship with all of the lecturers there. And I had the idea last year when I often get videos recorded from friends. So for example, Jonathan, I could say to you, can you record a quick 3-minute video for the students? Because I'm going back home and I've got to show the students some stuff. And I thought, why don't I just put all of those videos online rather than just showing them to the students once and then they're just disappearing. So I'm doing that. I'm starting that. I've got about 4 online now, and it's everything from the creative director for Nike's head of innovation and all of the innovation stores that they do. It's everything from the former DD Dubai University lecturer Mika, who's now in Tokyo on another university project, giving students advice, and a good friend of mine, Colin, who's a very sustainably conscious designer based in Newcastle, England, and other people. So the original message was, would you mind recording a short video, Jonathan? It wasn't necessarily a request to everyone, but
sorry, I was trying to multitask the 50 things.
It's great to tell you all about it, and it's on my to-do list to make a little bit more of a song and dance about it.
That's good. I've now made you accountable. It's you know, and New Year's resolution to
definitely
the community.
I'm gonna get 5, maybe 5 up this week. So
okay,
yeah.
we can let's chat offline. But yeah, massive thanks to Chris. Chris, did you have any other final kind of thoughts or anything you want to leave us with?
No, I just think
anything in general at all, or like,
yeah, just please keep in touch. Good luck if you are trying to push it within your organization or further afield. And let me know if you have any questions, or actually if you come across any other good resources. I try to be aware of this, but I've got many hats to wear. And I think it's a rapidly evolving field. So please, if you come across something else that could be useful, it could be another website carbon calculator type thing or other kind of useful tools, please feel free to share that back to me, and that might show itself up in the next time I give a talk about this.
Awesome.
But yeah, wishing you all the best of luck. If you have any questions or would like some help, as I said, we're kind of creating and putting finishing touches on what that audit process will be. And sometimes these things are best done sort of externally as well, to step outside the company politics. And that's something, as UX consultants, that's one of the hats that we wear. So be glad to help out on that if we can.
Yeah, and if anyone, unfortunately in those days we didn't record, but I'm happy to share, or you can hit up Chris and share as well. I didn't tell you, we never unfortunately have these catch-ups after the event, but Chris did a really great talk on UX strategy. And he had a very cool canvas that actually, Chris, I wanted to tell you, I've ran with the team and the product managers to kind of, and then it's quite long. It's like 30 questions. I digitized it, turned it into an Airtable. But then I came up since with a much shorter version, so we can do a much quicker poll of the wider organization and stakeholders to say, like, where is design at today and where are we going? Because internally within the product design team, you might think, even within the product management, like, we're doing a great job. However, you might, well, actually, we don't have some of these things, or the perception of the business is that we don't have them. And then it's like, well, we need more. And it's really helped to just get that kind of very quick survey to say, quarter on quarter, are we maturing design? So if anyone's interested in UX strategy or getting that, again, that external audit, reach out to Chris on LinkedIn. Huge thank you again, Chris, was really awesome. We do want to invite you in person, even if you're not doing a talk and you want to join us.
Thank you.
As I've said, if anyone's in Dubai, even if you're not, it will be a hybrid event. The week of February 20th, we've got the head of product design from Husby, I believe is the organization name. I hope I'm getting it right, which is a startup here in Dubai. And he's been around Dubai for a while. He's a Spanish designer, and really excited for that first in-person event and our second one of the year. So look out for that. It'll probably be next week. We advertise that. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Cool. Take care, everyone. Bye.